that's worth the price of admission, just to do that, because it saves time. For every quote that we do, that probably saves at least 15 minutes. And if you know the day in the life of a sales solution architect that's doing quotes, that really adds up. Yeah, so great question. In a previous life, I worked at a consulting partner that had actually built their own quoting tools. So they had a pretty big technology focus internally, and they actually built the professional service automation tool that Financial Force bought. And so they built a quoting tool on top of that as well that was integrated both with Salesforce Core Sales Cloud as well as Financial Force. And so there's a lot of economies of scale you can get with that, and reusability and predictability when you're doing quoting that way. And so that's something that we kind of set out to do here. Instead of building a tool, at this point we wanted to buy a tool. So that's when we started looking at different solutions. And then based on some of the connections we had with Tom and others, that kind of prompted us to go down the route to talk to you guys. And we looked at multiple tools, but PSQuote was the one we went with based on the features and functionality that it has. Yeah, so we did look at Certinia's product. They had a product that I think it was relatively new to the market. And when we started to look at that, looking at how it actually scoped out resources, scoped at the task or scope item level, it just didn't quite seem to be a fit for what we were looking for. We also looked at another product that was being developed. It wasn't generally available yet, from some contacts we had a relationship with offshore. And since it wasn't quite GA yet, we weren't confident in moving forward with that solution. Although it did seem to have pretty similar features to what PSQuote had. And then we looked at there was another product on the market that had been on the market for a while from Aperio, but that's no longer available on the App Exchange. I think that Wipro decided to retire all of the solutions that they bought with that acquisition. So PSQuote really, from a feature functionality perspective, hit a lot of the marks for us in terms of what we were trying to accomplish. So when we looked at PSQuote, some of the things that really stood out to us as big time savers, one would be the resource request sync. I've said this to PSQuote many times that that's worth the price of admission, just to do that, because it saves time. For every quote that we do, that probably saves at least 15 minutes. And if you know the day in the life of a sales solution architect that's doing quotes, that really adds up big time. There's also a lot of reusability and predictability with the offerings that you can set up. So you can have predefined offerings, predefined resources and hours, scope, quotes with resource plans, all of that. So that's a huge time saver as well. And it really goes back to what we want to be as a business. Instead of having to quote everything individually, we can sell more offering based. Like, this is how we do it. This is how we recommend to implement X, Y, and Z functionality on Salesforce. That's a big thing for us. The other thing it really did for us is made us look at some of our processes. So, for example, we can auto-generate a statement of work from PSQuote. Well, in order to do that really effectively, we had to step back and look at our statement of work and really simplify things. It had gotten pretty complicated. So now we have a statement of work that is, it's much simpler, but we have push buttons. So once we're done with the quote, we push a button, and I'd say it generates about 90% of our statement of work. We might have a few tweaks that we need to make, but that's a huge time savings there for a sales solution architect, for an account executive that needs to do that. So instead of doing, a lot of manual tasks that they need to do, we're giving them time back to do value-added tasks, to do more selling, versus creating a statement of work. So there's a lot of features and functionality that save a lot of time for us through PSQuote. Yeah, so I think one of the hardest things, anytime you're moving away from a spreadsheet, you can make it do whatever you want to do, right? It's not structured data, not structured information. You don't have the rules and guidelines and specific data sets that you have to work with in a spreadsheet. And so I think for a lot of people, losing that flexibility is something that they may not always be comfortable with. So you think about any, we're a consulting organization. Anyone that buys PSQuote, they're a consulting organization that's implementing products or services. All of their customers are resistant to change. So we're no different, right? So one of the things is just change management and acceptance of new technology. So part of that is selling the benefits, the time savings, the reusability, the predictability. And now we're getting into reporting and forecasting and a lot of the other things that we may not have even thought were going to be as valuable as they really are. So I think the biggest thing was just moving away from a spreadsheet where people are really comfortable and they can do whatever they want to do within the spreadsheet, which is not always a good thing, right? So that was probably the biggest thing for us. So I had previously mentioned the time-saving aspect of automatically creating resource requests. Also helps to keep data in sync for us between the quote and the opportunity. So it automatically puts the products on there and the dollar amounts to products on our opportunities, which that's another thing that we had to take a look at because we didn't have a great product mix, or really the product mix that represents Zennify now. So that's one of the things that we had to do as part of this is realign what our products were, simplify our statement of work. We added some additional resource roles and kind of redefined some of those things. So it forced us to do things better and more consistently in general. So in terms of additional benefits, we're starting to see now that we have insight into forecasting billable hours and resources much earlier in the process and more holistically. So before we would put resource requests in, and that gives you a certain amount of data, but it's much, much more detailed data in PSQuote. You can, our delivery team's even starting to look at it to see, okay, well, 6 months down the road, which types of resources does it look like we're going to need? Do we have the right resources on staff? We just started to sell offshore. So that's basically a new line for us to be able to offer offshore resources. So how many are we quoting? How many are we selling? What does that look like so that we can communicate with our offshore partner? So there's a lot of things that we can start to look at from a data perspective now that we may not have even been thinking about before, because when you're talking about multiple spreadsheets, you just don't have any way to do any of that visualization or consolidation of data in an easy manner. One other thing real quick too. One other thing it made us do is look at, so we had a library of scope items for each of our, not necessarily lines of business, but focus areas. So we had some scope items for Marketing Cloud, some for MuleSoft, for Encino, for Salesforce, but they were all in different formats because they had been done at different times by different teams. And so again, when you're getting out of the spreadsheet world and into structured data, it did kind of force us to, in a good way, look at all of that, go through and consolidate how that data is structured so that it's all in a very similar format. But because we were also going to automate the statement of work creation and bring that scope into the statement of work, it made us look at it again and say, okay, is this really customer ready? Because a lot of times that scope had been internal, but now we've got scope that's already pre-written for the customer to see in a statement of work, as well as assumptions that would go with that scope for a statement of work. So it really kind of forced us to get our house in order across the board, from resources to scope to our statement of work, to really kind of get things in a really structured and simplified manner. Yeah, I think that what it helps us do better, one is we're more consistent. Like I said, we had to go through and kind of revision some of our scope and how we basically documented all of that for our projects. So we're more consistent in how we're selling things. We're more consistent in the fact that we can pre-package some of our offerings and resell those, so that it doesn't vary as much between AE and solution engineers or sales solution architect. And it saves us a lot of time. So we're not having to spend as much time, doing some of the, data entry into Salesforce, like resource request, or saving time creating a statement of work. What would take hours now can take, minutes. It's definitely a time saving piece, and consistency. Yeah, there's a couple of things to that front. I think one, it's interesting to see what offerings we're actually selling or quoting the most. I mean, we had no idea, no insight to that before, because even our product data in Salesforce wasn't what we needed now, because part of it is we had to go through and restructure our product data in Salesforce that lives off the opportunity. But now we can see, what offerings are we selling, which products are we selling or quoting. You can see which resources. And so there's a lot of data that we have now that we didn't necessarily have clean access to before, because if it never even made it to, some projects kind of, you don't win every opportunity, right? It just doesn't happen. But for anything that was quoted and maybe went to proposal stage but didn't go any farther than that, none of that data was ever in Salesforce, really. It was all in spreadsheets. And so now we still have all of that data. We can reuse it. We can learn from it. And so that's been pretty insightful. I know our finance team is starting to look at the detailed data that we have from PSQuote around some of our forecasting, because it gives us much more detailed information, down to the week and resource and hour level. Much more detailed than you would get just from your standard, opportunity forecasting reports. And then delivery can look at it too from a, kind of a resource planning perspective to see what types of resources are we quoting way out in the future. Because we sell 1 year programs, so we can see out now past 12 months in some cases for some of our projects that we're quoting, where we may not have had that visibility before. So we have a lot of ideas for how AI can be used in the quoting process. From everything from the approval process. So once a quote's been put together, potentially using AI to validate that it meets all of our quoting rules. So that could be things like resource allocation for different resource types, the phasing, making sure we've got all of the pieces of a quote together. So some of that could be done without AI, but I think AI could make it a lot smarter. I was talking to John earlier this morning, and just kind of brainstorming the idea of, we take in a lot of information. So it's not always just a phone call, but it could be a Zoom recording or a Google Meet recording, plus documentation, plus notes that we have. What if we could feed that into AI and it starts to either recommend offerings to us, or even starts to put together a quote and a scope of work based on our predefined library, matching that to all the things that we heard in a phone call or throughout multiple scoping sessions for a client. So I think that's where things could get really interesting, because you're starting to do more automation to even pull some of those things together and start to create it. Now that we have a repository of structured data for all of the quotes that we're doing for our customers, and then we have the projects where we've delivered on that scope, all within Salesforce. So that's going to be pretty powerful for us long term, and give us a lot of capability as we start to see more and more usage of AI in the workplace.